Awesome. How's your evening going?
The evening's going well. It's at night here. I'll probably be going to bed after because I work at 5 in the morning. So
Ooh, yeah, that's early. Now, after this, I go and do rehearsal for some play. So,
good luck on that one. So I'm here to affirm the resolution that is adequate proof for the Christian faith. First off, I guess we should define some words. Of course, adequate being satisfactory or acceptable in equality or quantity type thing. So, or the statement. So for adequate proof, tonight I would define adequate proof as I have to supply satisfactory argument that the resurrection is proof for the Christian faith. So basically, that is the truth for the Christian faith. Would you agree with that, Sherry?
Yes, I would agree with all of that. I would also, maybe it's just my screen or maybe it's yours, but your visual has cut out for me, so I don't see you anymore, but just keep going, it'll be fine.
So I see it on my screen, so hopefully it's maybe watching this later on. So my first contention is if Jesus did raise from the dead, it would give validity to the Christian faith. And also the second context, contention I would be dealing with is the resurrection to the Christian faith. Meaning as in, if Jesus did in fact resurrect from the dead, the words that he spoke, and bear with me one here, that would be in John chapter 11, verse 25. Jesus actually stated that he is the life. Of course, 1 Corinthians chapter 5, Paul reiterates in Christianity that Jesus died for, or died and was raised on the third day, and was seen by the disciples and Caiaphas. And also, there are passages in the New Testament that state that if Jesus did not resurrect, it's in vain. So I do believe that the resurrection is prime in our faith, in the Christian faith.
Yes, I would agree that the resurrection is prime in the Christian faith. And I don't strongly disagree with either of your contentions there. I think that, first of all, when you say that adequate proof would be a satisfactory argument that the resurrection is proof for the Christian faith, I think that's a good standard to hold. And I don't necessarily disagree with either of the contentions you put forward. First, you say if Jesus can raise, then that gives validity to the Christian faith. But that doesn't prove the Christian faith. That would be one aspect of proving it. That's not a full proof in and of itself. And then you say that resurrection is unique to the Christian faith, but it's actually not, because there are numerous different faiths that have claimed to have resurrected saviors, many of them with equivalent levels of proof as the Christian God supposedly had as well. You are not currently believing in any of those other religions, which means you don't think resurrection on its own is enough of an argument to prove a faith. Because if you did, then you would accept the accuracy, the validity of those other faiths that have had resurrections. So I would be interested to see, where is your proof that the Christian resurrection is, you call it unique. What is it that makes it unique and makes it conclusive? Not just that it's a possible thing that might have happened, that it conclusively did happen.
Okay, so what unique in Christianity is that there's no other religion, quoted Hinduism, of course, that has God taking upon human nature, dying for the sins of his creation, and you don't actually have that even for Christianity. I think the closest one you draw to is Mithra, of course, right? Now, Mithraism would say that from the dead, but any story that you would conclude from that is written after the resurrection of Christ. So basically, any argument you want to use towards Mithra, that is later on after Christ's resurrection. So they're basically trying to copy what Christianity already established as a resurrection. There's no of Mithra resurrecting the dead, of course, before Jesus. So any of these stories that you would appeal to are going to find before the resurrection. And I would quote Geisler. He affirms that there's no religion before Christ that had a religion or a resurrection. Professor Ronald Nash, Mithra was after, and Noah has a resurrection. Also, Professor T.N.D. Ettinger of Lund University, he also affirms it is unique to the Christian faith, and who is actually an atheist as well. The list could go on. Michael Grant, also a historian, he's a atheist as well, and he affirms that the Mithra story is so. I'm not sure to where you would draw to any other faith, resurrection before Christianity.
Well, it seems like you kind of moved the goalpost there, because you're like, no other religion has God taking human nature and dying for the sins of his creation and resurrecting. So basically you said no other religion is Christianity. Duh. Nobody was claiming that. But the simple point was there are numerous other religions from numerous different time periods that have had claims and some legitimate evidence put forward to suggest that one of their central figures has died and resurrected, which was a central part of their faiths. It doesn't matter if that happened before or after. If it happened and you reject it, then you already have agreed that a resurrection isn't a proof of an adequacy of a faith in and of itself. There would have to be more than that. And the fact that you don't say anything against Mithra resurrecting or against Krishna resurrecting, and there are some who were claimed to have resurrected before, like Horus, and I have to look up a couple of Mithra came at a time before Jesus. That was I believe Iran in like the 400 BC or something like that. And I'm not certain about your claim that there were no written testimonies to the resurrection of Mithra before the time of Jesus. So that might be possible. I'm not sure about that one. But I do know that the story of Mithra did occur before. And one more thing that you would need to get into here is you're simply claiming that Jesus resurrected, but you haven't presented any proof that actually happened. It wouldn't just have to be there's some stories that he resurrected, but this being a central tenet, and your burden of proof here, if you're going to put faith in this religion based on this claim, you would need to show with a reasonable degree of certainty that Jesus Christ really did resurrect.
No, yeah, and just to touch on the point about, you even mentioned Horus, and I don't believe it's Horus. I think it's more of Horus that most claim that, or even Otis, or I'm not sure how to pronounce that name as well. But those stories aren't actually of an actual resurrection as Christianity has. Different type of story whatsoever. Horus type story is that he was cut up in pieces and he was put back together and brought back. That's not the type of that we have for Christ. So to compare the two, I don't believe would be reasonable at that point.
Why does that matter? Wait, let me interject here. Why do you think that is so different? So the story is a little different. Okay, so he was cut up into a bunch of different pieces and then came back to life. That's still part of this whole narrative. Just because the Christian version of it happens a little bit differently doesn't make it any more or less important. If it happened in Christianity, and if it happened in other religions, it's equally valid.
The resurrection of the Christian faith, the uniqueness of it, is God who took upon human form, raised bodily, of course. So when we're talking about Horus or Osiris, they weren't actually gods who took upon human form, right? And there's much to what they were actually created, things to this nature. Many say that there was a virgin birth, and that's disputed as well. So there's nothing real concrete to say that there was even a type of resurrection for Osiris or Horus. I was just giving it the benefit of the only one that actually is close to Christianity, and I would agree with is the Mithra story, basically. And we only see this later on after Christianity. Now, you've even affirmed that was sought to be a god before was around, roughly about 400 years before Christianity, right? So if there's no stories of Mithra actually resurrecting for 400 years, but then all of a sudden, 200 years after the death of, find stories of Mithra resurrecting, it's very easy for us to be able to tell that they're embellishing to Mithra to be able to compare to the claim of Christianity. And this is what scholars, as I've said, Norman Geisler, Ronald Nash, TND, Michael Grant, all these professors and historians, scholars, that the Mithra story is well after the resurrection of Jesus. Now, the uniqueness of it is one thing, of course, right? Now, I did have two contentions here. Now, if Jesus did resurrect from the dead, it does give validity to the Christian faith. Now, you hear where I should present concrete evidence that in fact Jesus did raise from the dead. Now, I agree with you that we could have, because we're finite beings, 100%, right? So we have to go back to the adequate proof type in the resolution. So I should have to give a satisfactory argument to why the resurrection is a fact or not, of course, right? Just going to an atheist scholar, even Bart Ehrman, I'm not sure if you would agree with his synopsis of it, but even reading the New Testament, the disciples of Christ who saw Christ come to them, one, it was a group vision of Christ, of course, right? That many atheists would say, us Christians would say it was Christ. Disciples, they all saw and heard the same thing. Now, Bart Ehrman say that he believes that the disciples believe that they saw the risen. Now, many of these died for the belief that they actually witnessed the risen Christ. What would you say to that type of argument of the poll showing, or the showing of Jesus people in attestation? What type of validity would you give that?
Some. I will say that it's not a negative toward Christianity. It certainly is a good argument in favor of the possibility of the risen Christ. The fact that the disciples clearly did believe that they had seen him, and they believed in this resurrection, and therefore were willing to die for him. But it's not a proof. In the same way that you don't accept Mormonism, even though Joseph Smith died for his religion in a U.S. prison. We don't accept Muslim martyrs. We don't accept martyrs from another religion as accuracy of that religion. We just say they believed it. Just because they believed it doesn't mean they were right. That's not a proof. It is a reasonable thing to say. Okay, it's some circumstantial evidence. It's a circumstantial point, but it's not a proof one way or the other. So, and I'm not. You're right that I'm not expecting you to prove to 100.0% certainty. That would be unreasonable of me. Human minds are finite. We can't do that. But there would have to be some reasonable degree of certainty at which we can go, all right, this is fact or close enough to fact to be able to say I will put faith in the elements of it that are beyond my current comprehension.
Yeah, for sure. So we understand what is the most plausible answer to what happened. Now, I agree that Jesus did live 2 years ago. You're not a Jesus mythicist.
No, I think he existed, yeah.
Jesus did walk the earth. Now, do you believe that there was a crucifixion and that Jesus did die of crucifixion?
I do.
Okay, so we're in agreement that Jesus did walk this earth 2,000 years ago. There was a crucifixion. So there would have been a body. So you have to have the most plausible story, what's going on at a certain time. Now, there's no other evidence per se that I've seen that would persuade me that maybe that the body was stolen. Now, I don't believe it's really up for, would you agree that there is no body in the tomb? After checked upon afterwards? Like there's
yes.
no body of Jesus?
Yeah, that the stones rolled away, and that at some point in the narrative, there was no longer a body in the tomb. Sure, yeah.
So before we get into this too much, though, do you actually, would you, a lot of the New Testament can be reliable in a historical sense?
Well, it depends on which part of the New Testament we're talking about. If there is a New Testament account that is backed up by historians at the time, and that is internally consistent with other accounts within the New Testament, it usually can be pointed to as accurate. But if there is no other outside backing, then it would be a rather internally biased reason to believe something. And it also, if there are contradictions within two New Testament accounts, then it wouldn't be pointed to as conclusive witness testimony.
So as long as multiple authors attest to the same thing, the validity is more probable than just one person mentioning it. Then, right?
A similar standard to a court of law. If you have 5 people who all come forward with the same story, but all of them have wildly different explanations of how it happened, it doesn't seem like that story actually worked out the way any of them are saying it did. Even though they all say, oh, something happened, they all have different ideas of what it was. So it's not actually shown. The same would be true here. You would have to show that the points brought up by the authors were internally consistent, and that it is conclusive proof, or conclusive at least to the level that humans can say.
Okay, so well, basically what I'm doing here is I'm talking about the death in the sort of the crucifixion and the resurrection of that's foretold within the narratives of the New Testament. So within the New Testament, I believe a narrative that the body was in the tomb, but it is a bodily resurrection that is written about Jesus. At the time that Paul is writing this is 22 years after, or between 20 to 25 years after the death of Christ, and this is the creed that I first mentioned in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, that states that Jesus was raised, and that he died, and that he was resurrected, or sorry, that he raised. Okay, now raised, that they acknowledged at that time that it was a bodily resurrection. Now, us getting this information within 20 to 25 to the death of someone, can that be acceptable as a truthful statement? Because people around that would know if the body was in the tomb or not at the time.
Well, the body was no longer in the tomb, if that's what you're saying. That doesn't mean that necessarily the reason it wasn't in the tomb was because of a resurrection.
Okay. No, I definitely agree with you on that. Like, you can't just say, okay, there's no body in the tomb. Amen, there's a resurrection. Okay, that's over. But the most plausible story, or the most plausible that I would put forward, is that there wasn't a resurrection. Now, if I only see 2 scenarios here, really, that would be a plausible argumentation, of course. One being the resurrection, and one being maybe the body was taken, was hidden, it was buried somewhere, and it was just never recovered. Those, to me, are the only plausible arguments that could be made. Now, we have to understand what type of figure Jesus was at the time, right? Jesus was a very high figure in everybody's mind at the time. It was just after the crucifixion. It was just after Passover. There was a big commotion. We even have writings of the early writers, non-Christians, that say that there was Christ being mentioning that there was uprising and stuff when he was around. So, circle, he would have been known to the community. So just to say that the body was just taken and it was buried, I think actually just begs the question. When we look into the resurrection, we actually see that Bart Ehrman actually affirms, and one of the best proof, the multiple vision of Jesus at the same time. So many people seeing and hearing the same thing is one of the better proofs of the resurrection. But also, it's just hard for me to accept anything else that would be plausible at the time. Being that the only two arguments that I see, resurrection or the body being taken. Could you see that there would be any type of plausible argument for the body being taken?
Yeah, so I haven't made any arguments yet, so I'll make a couple of them now based on that. So let me first answer one thing you said. You said that many people were seeing and hearing from Jesus after the resurrection, but that's not actually true. The only thing that we have on that was, I believe it's John, I might have that wrong, but one of the writers in the New Testament says, and if we were to write about the deeds that Jesus did, it would be so numerous that it would fill numerous books. Except those books don't exist. None of them were written. There were no accounts of that. There also were no outside accounts of that. There are no historians who are going, wow, this guy resurrected from the dead, and it was such an important thing, and so many people saw it. Nobody outside is saying that. So the Bible made that one claim, that one time, and then you point to that as well. But there's no evidence of that at all, that very many people saw it. The only people supposedly who saw it were the people who saw Jesus ascend and the disciples. That's it. Nobody else. We have no real other record of that anywhere else. Now, let me go into you asked the question about would there be an alternate to Jesus having resurrected? And honestly, the alternate would be that the body was stolen. And I agree with you. Those probably are the two most likely options. Either the body was stolen or a resurrection. The first thing I would say here is the rational skepticism would be that we don't assume the miraculous, because the miraculous would have to be proven. That to make an extreme claim would require extreme proof when there is a plausible explanation. So let me
pause you there, though, Daniel. That's actually not. That's really a faulty claim. Just to say that extraordinary evidence, you would need extraordinary. Not actually the case in most cases. Just when it comes to religion, of course, right? So that's not really to be able to determine how you would be able to present evidence. That's all.
No, I would say that about anything. If someone said, like I had that same standard with Donald Trump. I mean, if there are claims being made, I'm the greatest person, I'll be the greatest jobs president ever. That's an extraordinary claim. Where's your proof of that? That sort of thing. It's if you're going to make something such a big claim, there would have to be something for that. And the miraculous is something we never see. If you're going to make that statement, that there's no like, we don't just believe that. If I say I am a god, you're not just going to believe me. That's an extraordinary claim. I really need to do a lot to prove that. And you would be right to not just believe me if I say I'm a god. So let me talk about the other possibility here. So we have the resurrection versus possibly the body being stolen. So there are some problems with the resurrection, believing in the resurrection. The first one is that there are no witnesses, not one. There was nobody in any account who saw Jesus actually resurrect. There is literally no proof of the resurrection because nobody actually saw it happen. And whether a Christian, whether an atheist, whether a Jew, whether a Roman, nobody. There's not one account who said that they actually saw it happening. And that leads to the second problem here, which is the stone was rolled away. And I used to hear this one in church. There'd be songs about the stone was rolled away, and it was supposed to be this amazing thing. It was so powerful. The stone was rolled away. Why? That doesn't make sense, because we're talking about a god. Gods don't care about stones. They can go through walls. So the fact that the stone was rolled away suggests a human element. Who rolls away stones? Humans, grave robbers, not gods. So that actually points very strongly toward a different conclusion than that there was a resurrection, because a God wouldn't have needed to have done this. Then another problem here is that there are completely contradictory accounts of those who actually saw the tomb. If you read each of the four Gospels, and I believe it's Acts is the other one, each one has a different number of people who actually come and discover the body. It's Mary Magdalene, or it's Mary Magdalene and one other woman. It's Mary Magdalene and John and one other one. It's one person, it's two person, it's three person, it's four person, or it's many person. Not one of the accounts say the same thing. They're all different. Another problem with this story is the fact that even in the Bible, the one that's supposed to be the proof here, even in the Bible, it points out that immediately afterwards, the people were talking about how the Jews had stolen the body. Even in the Bible, it says that that was the common story of the time, that the Jewish leaders were saying that. And the thing is, it's possible that there was a resurrection. I'm not going to say it wasn't. I wasn't there. Neither of us were there. But it's certainly not proven. When there's just as much reason to believe that that the body was stolen, it certainly isn't a proof. And the last argument I'm going to make on this one is going to be that of the Romans. The Romans, you pointed this out, the Romans had taken note of violent uprisings. So if there was this extraordinary claim, there's this person who resurrected, he's walking amongst the people, he's around. Why didn't the Romans take note of that? Why didn't the Jews take note of that? Why isn't that in any of their historical accounts? You'd think that would be, because it was supposedly this immensely important transformational moment, and yet nobody has written about it. Not even Christians have written about it, which strongly suggests that it wasn't actually Jesus who was walking amongst the people, that was either a legend or that it was someone who looked like Jesus who was doing that. But there's certainly no evidence to say that the resurrection of Jesus Christ was proven. I'm not going to say it didn't happen, but I'm also not going to say it did happen, because there's no evidence to say that conclusively.
No, yeah, and I would agree. Point. Depends on how you want to speak about evidence. But at your arguments, I'll try to go in reverse to see if I can remember what you stated. So basically, you're stating that there's no Jewish writing or anything else of Jesus resurrecting, no Roman writings of Jesus resurrecting, or Jewish writings of Jesus walking around the street and people seeing him and things to this nature. To understand that 2,000 years ago, to be a Christian wasn't a very good thing, right? At the time, Christians were being hunted. Christians were being burned alive. Christians were being killed. So at that point in time, probably not going to have Jesus walking down the street with his disciples in front of people as you're trying to portray. The sightings of Jesus that are in the New Testament, and actually where you stated that there was multiple people that went to the grave and that's a contradiction, which is one reason why you reject the resurrection. Now, what I would say is that each biblical writer or each gospel writer doesn't write specifically the same thing. Each gospel writer is given a specific idea, and they expound upon that, and then they basically telegraph the rest. So we're not going to see every gospel read identically the same about the same thing. So even if one story mentions one, that doesn't mean there's not two or three of them. So I really don't, I don't see the real argument behind that. Now the book, Dr. Craig Witherington, or I can't even remember his name, but there was 4 Christian writers that wrote a rebuttal to Bart Ehrman, Bart Ehrman's book about this. And that's what they point out about this, is that the New Testament writers, because they don't write the same in a lot of places, they telescope a lot of different areas within the that they write. They're not always going to the same thing. So it's almost like if me and you went to a movie, we wrote a review about the movie when we come home. Your review is not going to be the same as my review, but we still saw the movie. You could have said there was this person and you expounded upon this person, and I could have said, well, there's this person and another person, and I would have expounded upon something different. So this is the same type of thing that we see in the gospel. So just to see that there was one and one, two and another, it's not really a contradictory fact when we look at the evidence at hand. Now, what was one of the other arguments? Sorry.
Stone rolled away.
The stone rolled away. Yeah, because you said that a guy could just simply walk through it, of course. But I honestly believe that it was to show the people that there was no body. Because why would somebody check the grave? Right? There would be no reason to check the grave if there's a body in it. So if the stone was rolled away or the stone was moved, people would be able to see that actually a body in the tomb, right? So this is why I believe that even though God could have walked out and whatever, and nothing could have happened, I definitely agree with that, because the in the room had the multiple attestation of Jesus. When he come through the door and it's closed. So at that time he passed, and he didn't need to open it. So I agree with you that a spiritual body at that time doesn't really need to move something physical to be able to get through it. But I do believe that it was the fact that to show that there was no body there. In fact, by the third day, Jesus did as he promised to in the beginning, right? So if Jesus didn't raise by the third day, our faith is in vain, right? So if there's no resurrection, there's no reason for me at all, plain and simple. So this is why I believe that the stone was moved and that people were able to see that there was. Now we could go back to the prophecy back in Isaiah 53 about the suffering and things to this nature. Of course, we only have 12, 13 minutes left, and we want to try to get to the rest of the conversation that we're having now.
Yeah, sure. So let me respond to each of the things you had about some of my arguments there. So first, you said that 2,000 years ago, to be a Christian wasn't a good thing because Christians were being hunted. But my answer to this would be, if Jesus' resurrection was actually seen, and if there were numerous books which could be written about it, which is what the gospel said, one of the gospels at least, then why weren't there? Why didn't the Romans see this? Why didn't the Jews see this? Why weren't any, even in Christian tradition, why weren't these numerous books being written about what Jesus did after he resurrected? That would be almost like go ahead. Yeah.
Almost like an argument from silence, because there is no type of mention, it couldn't have happened type thing.
Well,
like, I agree with you, though, that because we don't have any writings of Jesus's lifetime before his ministry, right? Before, like, there's 30 years of Jesus' life that we don't have any documentation for, right? So,
well, I mean, afterwards, after he resurrected, which and then I think it's John says that if we were to write about the things he did afterwards, it would fill numerous books.
No, I don't know if the actual verse says the things that Jesus did afterwards. I believe that it states that everything that Jesus done, and I believe that would go throughout his life, right? And I believe that this is more entailed to the first 30 years, because if we're going to detail his life every day for 30 years, like, wow, right? It's just the amount of books that you would have at that time just be unreal, right? So that's more of what he's alluding to at that time. And even the miracles and things the disciples would have saw at that time, a lot of those weren't written in because of what we have now. It's just there would have been too much. Now, it's not actually saying that all of this after the resurrection happened and there's so much of it that we just can't contain. So
okay, yeah, fair enough. So maybe that verse is talking about Jesus's life before his death. That's possible. I would have to reread it and everything, but you might be right on that one. But if that's the case, and it might be the case, but if that is, then that means that what Jesus did after his resurrection was not significant. because nobody did write about it. So there wasn't any writings from the Romans or the Jews or even really the Christians on what Jesus did afterwards. So there's very little proof of his resurrection in what he did afterwards, so based on that.
What do you mean what he did afterwards, though?
After resurrecting, like if Jesus resurrected and then went to Rome, and Romans were like, wow, this dude was just dead and now he's alive, and then you have historical evidence of a resurrection. But he didn't, and there was nothing of that. There's no Roman writings, no Jewish writings, not even really many Christian writings about what Jesus did after the resurrection. So that's not to say he didn't resurrect. It's just to say there's not any evidence in that is sort of an argument from silence there of how there just isn't really the evidence of it.
But we actually have multiple attestations of Christ coming to people after the resurrection.
Right, but not many of them. That's literally what I'm saying right there. That's why I was saying if this was really if he really did resurrect, where are all of them? The only ones you really see then are the disciples. That's basically it.
Why would he have to appear to multiple people at that point? You're making it seem like Jesus should have appeared to more people than he did.
Maybe you're right. Maybe you're right that the Bible didn't actually say that. Maybe that's possible. But I'll move on to another argument that sort of ties into this one. Okay. So the stone was rolled away. You responded to this by saying that there was that the reason the stone would have been rolled away was to show the people that there was no body. So obviously that was important for Jesus to show this was going on, even according to your own argument. Which would also suggest this whole thing that I'm talking about, how he should have appeared to more people, how there was such an easy way to get outside verification, but he didn't do it. But more than that, if Jesus is appearing to the people, then he can let the Romans check. Let me give you a scenario of a very easy way he could have done this. God, being God, can go through the walls. He can go through the rock. No reason to roll the stone away. He resurrects. He shows up in the room with the disciples, just like that. Then he walks among the people and says, look, I'm alive. And he forces the Romans to open the tomb themselves. And the Romans write about it and say, wow, we just killed this guy. We don't even believe in him, but he clearly resurrected. If God actually wanted to show the people, I resurrected, he could have done it that way. But he didn't. Which suggests the opposite is true, that the reason the stone was rolled away was because somebody was breaking in. And I'll let you respond to that because I think that's a kind of important point there.
I thought you were kind of giving me a trollish answer on that when you said that God could have just went to the Romans, made them move the stone and things to that nature. Because honestly, throughout the scriptures, when we read them, we understand that Jesus actually proclaimed he will be 3-day type of timeline that he would be in the grave. Of course, right? We can even go to the parable where he said that's going to be given is that of Jonah. Of course, Jonah, the timeline was 3 days and 3 nights. So therefore, this would be in the belly of the beast for the 3 days and 3 nights. Death to basically.
Yeah, but you're misunderstanding the definition. I'm saying he could have done the. I'm saying he could have done the same thing that he did do. He could have resurrected, gone to the disciples. He doesn't need to roll away the stone. But then, because he is resurrected, that causes them to go to the tomb and check on it. That would have been a much better way to get this verification rather than rolling the stone away. Because the rolling the stone away is something that would just as easily, in fact, more plausibly, point to it being broken into rather than it being broken out of, if it's God. But let me see here. So you said that each of the writers of the Gospels have a specific idea that they write about. And you said that they telegraph the rest. And this was your explanation of why there were multiple contradictory accounts. That did tell a similar story, but in contradictory ways. And my answer to this would be that if they're telegraphing the rest, and they all were written afterwards, then this would suggest that they contain elements of legend. And it's part of the reason that it wouldn't hold up in court. And this also comes back to the other thing that I had pointed out, which was nobody actually saw Jesus resurrect. Not one person saw it happening. So we have a possibility, but we don't have a probability there, especially since the Bible itself even points out that at the time, the Jewish leaders were saying, hey, there was a grave robbery. People broke in. There is ample reason to believe that that is possible. Now, me personally, I don't believe either story. I don't know what happened. I wasn't there. I'm not going to make it contention. But in a court of law, if there are two equally plausible theories, and they are equally plausible, there's no real reason to prefer one over the other. But if there are two equally plausible theories, then they're not guilty. And in the same case here, you said that if there's no resurrection, there's no reason to be a Christian. Well, it's the same with proof. If there's no proof of the resurrection, then there's no proof of, or no conclusive, or at least no reason to say that this is adequate proof of the Christian faith. And for that reason, I don't think that this claim of the resurrection does prove the Christian faith.
Okay, so just to get back, and you're speaking a lot about could have did this and God could have did that. Me as a Christian, to jump in the mind and say that the way that God chose it isn't the proper way, that there is a better way for God to do something, to me is just funny. And to see that Jesus all through the New Testament said that there was going to be days and that he would raise from the dead. I can honestly see the God doing what he did, moving the stone so that people could visibly see that there was a body there. I could see that being a plausible argument for an actual resurrection. Now, you're stating that none of the Jewish people would say anything like this, and the Jewish people were stating that the body was stolen from the grave. But what is, the Jewish people at the time were discrediting who Jesus was and what his message was. So if in fact Jesus is true and that the body was not, did raise, then the Jewish leaders were wrong and they lost all authority, right? The people would have then all turned Christian. There would have been no Jewish faith at the time. Jewish people, to save face and to save their authority, of course they would have invented stories that the body was stolen, that there's no other way, things to this nature, so that they could keep authority. I don't see that being a wrongful answer, of course. Now, the reason why I believe that the resurrection of Jesus Christ is adequate proof of the Christian faith is because that we have so many attestations of Jesus coming to the disciples. We have the earliest writings, historical writings, even from Paul in 1 Corinthians. We have numerous gospel writers. Now, most of these within the first century. Revelations is dated much later. Hebrews is dated later. The Gospels that we're speaking about, now are usually dated within 60 years of Christ's death. Now, within 60 years of Christ's death, we have 4 different authors, so 4 different attestations about the same person saying the same thing. I believe that the best proof for the resurrection is, and a well-known, again, I'll just quote Bart Ehrman, historian, New Testament scholar, actually affirms that he actually believes that the disciples themselves believed that they saw the risen Christ. Now, he doesn't believe it because he's an atheist, and he's not a Christian, of course, but he believes that they believe that they saw the risen Christ, so that they had that much admiration and that much intensity that he actually they believed they saw that. Go ahead with 1 minute left.
Okay, so we'll finish this up here. This has been nice talking to you, and we should do something like this again. I always like talking to you. So to answer the couple things you said here, that me talking about a better way God could have done things is funny to you, but that's because of your preconceived conclusion here. You've preconceived the idea that God exists. I'm starting from a perspective that I don't know if he does or not, and then I'm just asking, what is the most logical thing that he would have done? And if he doesn't do the most logical thing, then it doesn't seem like a proof. It seems to be the opposite, because God, being perfect, would do what is logical. You then say that the Jewish leaders were trying to save face. Well, yeah, that's one plausible theory. They might have been doing that. They might have been lying, or equally plausible, they might have been telling the truth. We have no way of knowing, which is why this isn't proof for the resurrection. it says the opposite. And the last thing I'm just going to say is that I think that there is a possibility of a resurrection, but it hasn't been proven and it's not adequate.